Hard to believe. 2017, a brand spanking new year. Now it's true that we were also here last Sunday on New Year's Day, but that was a little soon to be getting the idea, the concept of a new year under our belts, or at least under my belt. And as I was thinking about getting a whole new year under my belt this morning, and they seem to come with increasing frequency as I get a little older, I started thinking about the fact that the Australians have a wonderful concept in their culture called going walkabout. At some point, a person will simply decide to go off, journeying with no apparent plan or direction, or even a specific length of time in mind. Getting nervous yet? So this morning we're just going to kind of set off and see where we wound up. Actually, it's a little bit more organized than that. And as a preface, I should say that this past week I had finally gotten around to starting to think about resolutions. After all, what would a new year be without New Year's resolutions? Dan Rather did an editorial quite a while ago now in which he lamented the fact that most people's New Year's resolutions didn't last too long. And he suggested a good reason. He said the reason was simply that people made them too difficult to keep. If we were going to be successful at keeping our New Year's resolutions, he said, we just need to make them easier. He said, for example, that in that coming year in which he was writing the article, he had resolved he would not pay more than $500 for a cup of coffee, no matter how good that cup of coffee was. I suspect I could handle that one for a year, but I also have to say that there are probably some places in the country these days where we might have to raise the financial limitation a little bit. He also said that he'd resolved that in that coming year, he would not allow himself to be cloned. That's another one that might not be as simple to keep as it was during the year that he first proposed it, but I'm pretty sure that no matter what the advances in technological, scientific sorts of stuff were, I could handle that one too. Although one reason might be nobody's ever asked. There were a couple of others, including one about how much he would listen to certain teenage rock bands in the coming year, but we don't need to go there. I think you get the point. Don't challenge yourself. If you make resolutions concerning things that you would do or not do anyway, you don't ever have to worry about breaking them. And while we might not have done so well with resolutions in the past, here we are with a brand new year and a chance to try again. And there is something profoundly theologically significant about that reality. Most of the time, we tend to start each new year out with the best of intentions in a whole lot of different areas. I've always liked the story about the man hired by the local public works department. It was back in the days when they painted the lines down the center of the road by hand. It's only a while ago. The first day he painted 5 miles of road, and the supervisor couldn't believe it. It was a new town record. And the second day, however, he was down to about 4 miles. After 3 days, he was down to 2, and finally after a whole week, he was only able to paint about 500 feet a day, and the supervisor went to him and asked why he was doing so much worse. And the man replied, I'm still doing my best, but every day I get further and further away from the paint bucket. And if we're not careful, that can happen to us as well. It's just so easy for us to wander further and further away from the bucket, from the things that are important. And that includes the one who gives us life, who fuels our being, who enables us to keep all those pesky resolutions in the first place. In case you didn't notice, the gospel reading for this morning is, at least in part, about Jesus sort of going walkabout. It comes at the end of Luke's 2nd chapter, He and his parents had made the big trip up to Jerusalem for the Feast of Passover. Everything had gone well until they started for home. All of a sudden, when they've already been on the road for a day, Mary and Joseph look around for Jesus only to discover that he's not there. Traveling in a group the way people did back then, it's easy to lose track of one child, more or less, I guess. The proof lies in watching Home Alone. Home Alone 1, Home Alone 2, Home Alone 3, whatever. Mary and Joseph are in a panic. And as a parent, and particularly as a grandparent, I can identify with them. Back to Jerusalem they go, search for 3 days, before they find him, of all places, in the temple, talking to the teachers. The Pharisees as well, I suspect. He got a pretty good chewing out from the folks. And let me be the first to tell you, he deserved it. After all the searching, I could just see Mary saying to him, "Child, what was going on in your head? Your father and I have been frantic. We had no idea where you were. We were searching everywhere." And Jesus, of course, looks at her and calmly replies with his famous words, "Why were you searching for me? Did you not know that I must be about my Father's business?" Having a holy child is clearly not the bed of roses it might have appeared when chatting with Gabriel in the garden. But, the pastor asked rhetorically, other than somebody going wandering, what does this story have to do with New Year's resolutions? And even more significantly, for that matter, what does this story have to do with we three kings following a star and bringing gifts to the Christ child? But for the answer to that wonderfully stated rhetorical question, you have to stay with me for just another minute or 12. Scripture tells us almost nothing about Jesus' early life. We have the story of Jesus being presented in the temple after 8 days, and we'll get back to that one next Sunday morning, or at least that's my plan. But as far as his early life is concerned, this is all the Gospels share with us. I should point out that there are lots of other stories out there in non-scriptural texts dating from the time when the Gospels were written about Jesus' early life, and there are some pretty good reasons why none of them ever made it into Scripture. But we're not going to talk about them this morning, because I really have probably taken more time than I should have to get to this point. But you see, these wanderings this morning, whether they be Jesus or mine, are all about time. And that's, at least in part, what it seems to me this story is about. And it is what ties this story, for me at least, to New Year's resolutions and wise men from afar. It's surprising how many of my resolutions over the years have had to do with time. The time available, how I choose to use it. Mary and Joseph find Jesus in God's house. He had gone there with the best of intentions, and he got talking with the scholars there, and he probably just lost track of time. One of the things it means to really be in God's house, to really be present in worship, means that we are living in a different time, in God's time, living by the calendar of eternity rather than the clocks of passing fads. You know, time itself is fundamentally a human invention. We measure it by celestial means, but time itself is relative to our perception of it. The only reason that this is the year 2017 is that a religious leader in the Middle Ages did some calculations and research, and they were really good calculations and research, and said that's what this year is, or more correctly at the time, what it would be when we got here. And I have to confess that the world's time can be an issue for me. One reason that I have to have all the calendars and clocks I can get my hands on is to try to get me where I am supposed to be, when I am supposed to be there. And yet, with all the technology available to me, I screw up more often than you can imagine. Speaking of which, it was a beautiful day this morning. I left at 6:30. I was driving across. The sun was shining. The sky was blue. No snow was falling. The roads were clear. And I was having a great time until I came to the Molten Borough School and saw the flashing blue lights on the vehicle going in the other direction with his directional light about to turn around and follow me. I pulled over pretty quickly. I confess this because you should know the imperfections of your pastor, even if he's just an interim pastor. I was able to plea bargain down to a warning. It worked out okay, but time, speed, can be difficult for me in this world. But God's time, for some reason, that's much clearer to me. Mary and Joseph had their schedule to keep. Jesus had his. And at that moment in time, they simply didn't mesh. And as we ponder resolutions for the new year, one of the things we could ask is, how might we live our lives a little more closely in tune to God's time? In this story, Jesus reminds us, or perhaps actually invites us, to spend more time on things that are truly important in God's eyes. But how do we do that? So much to do. So many places to go. So many people to see. So many responsibilities. Surely the world will collapse around us in ruins unless we can somehow get everything organized and scheduled and completed on time. And part of the problem is we all do have serious responsibilities. So much of what we do is important. But Jesus says to his parents, "Did you not know that I must be about my Father's business?" I'm sure that he could have also added, "I know we have to get back to Nazareth. I know that there are still things I have to learn. I know that there are things to be done in the shop of my earthly father. There's that cradle that needs to be sanded and finished before the baby is born. There's that table that has to be leveled before the newly married couple moves into their new home. There's that bench from the synagogue that needs mending. There are tools to be repaired and saws to be sharpened, and all of those things are important. But my heavenly Father's work is important too. I need to strengthen my spirit, not just my mind even, not just my body. I need time spent with my heavenly Father in worship, in study, in meditation, in prayer, and even in discussions with those in the temple who may perhaps even more know than I do at this point. I need to do all that if I'm to be ready to do all that he has called me to do. And that's true for us too. Balance. We need balance in our lives. And that involves how we spend our time. Most of us would have more balance. I was going to say we, but I should probably say I did not strive to claim personal responsibility for everything that happens around me. I had a little note that I used to carry in my wallet before I retired. A good friend of mine gave it to me a long time ago. It was a short note that read simply, "Dear Ted, I know that being in absolute control of everything around you makes you often feel better, but don't worry. You do what I asked you to do and I'll take care of the rest. I've got lots of help besides you. Thanks anyway, signed God." It can be hard for us to hear words like that. It can be hard for us to hear words like the ones we sang a few moments ago. Though the wrong seems off so strong, God is the ruler yet. How can God be the ruler when there is so much around us that seems so very wrong? And how can God really be the ruler when we want to be in charge? And there are serious things in life for which we bear responsibility. But the further we get away from the bucket, the harder life becomes. We need that presence of God in our lives. We need to be living in God's time, connected to the source of wisdom and guidance and strength and life itself. And we need time spent with family and friends. Jesus often went off alone with his disciples simply to recharge. He often went off by himself. Leisure, from the Latin, means simply to be free. It's anything that restores us to a sense of freedom and peace while we're doing it. The child born in the manger came to bring us peace that passes all understanding, and it seems to me the least that we can do is try to accept that one gift. We need time for rest. We need time for work. We need time to see the light. It's taken a long time to get around to Epiphany and to the wise men following a star. If they had kept to their charts and their scrolls and calculations, if they had kept to their study and their musings, kept to all the things they were expected to do, that they were supposed to do, they would have missed not the light of the star perhaps, but certainly the personal meaning of that light. But they came together and set out because they did not just calculate the positions of the stars. They saw the light of one particular star and understood that it had relevance, not just for the people in Judea, but for them as well. May God give us the courage to take the time we need in our lives to remove the obstructions of busyness and the concerns and the responsibilities of the moment. And may He give us the grace to be able to really see the one who is the light of the world and to follow Him. The wise men saw the light and brought Him the best gifts they could bring, but the most important gift each of them brought was not something, but someone. They each brought the gift of Himself. New resolutions for the coming year. I've got a few. I'm going to try to focus on one thing at a time rather than going in 10 different directions at once. I'm going to try to listen more without interrupting. That's a hard one for me. I'm going to try to be better about planning for personal time each day. I'm going to try to remember that things worth being are always more important than things worth having, and sometimes even worth doing. I'm going to try to find a better balance. And Dan Rather's advice notwithstanding, I think it's worth challenging myself. I think it's worth challenging ourselves to do a little better. Mother Teresa, I'm pretty sure she's a saint now, said once, there are no great big tasks before us. There are just an endless number of small tasks to be done with great love. The formal liturgical calendar of the Roman Catholic Church, among others, tells us that we are now entering that first portion of the new church year characterized and referred to as ordinary time. And I have to admit that as a Baptist, Lutheran, Methodist, sometimes Episcopalian, that's the one that always gets to me. I love that term. Ordinary time. What a prophetic word for us. For that is, after all, where we live out most of our lives. Most of what we do in ordinary time. Real life is the life that goes on when we're waiting perhaps for something extraordinary to burst in upon us. But most of life is ordinary time, lived with purpose, lived with grace. Jesus needed this time in the temple because it was part of what informed and directed and guided his life. He needed time apart with his disciples and time alone. And even time in the temple. He needed time for discussion and meditation and prayer because it strengthened and sustained him in the midst of the work of his day-to-day ministry. And his use of his ordinary time gave his life the strength, the balance, the purpose he needed in order to be able to deal with the extraordinary when it came along. The wise men brought him gifts which foreshadowed all the extraordinary things that were coming. But it is the gifts that he gives to us that make all the difference. The gift of life, to be lived day by day with his help, in his purpose, in this world and the next. The gift of light, to guide all of our days. The gift of love, poured out upon us absolutely and unconditionally, without measure, to receive and to share. And of course, the gift of time. May we use all his gifts, even that last one, wisely and well. I should at this point probably say, here endeth the going walkabout. I'll try to be more organized next week. Let's pray. Almighty and eternal God, we are grateful for the gift of time. The gift that you share with us in this life to allow us to live through the ordinary experiences and the extraordinary experiences, guided by your Spirit, strengthened by your presence, renewed by your grace. And help us to use these lives that you have shared with us wisely and well.